The Gold Rush was the most eagerly anticipated film of the decade. Chaplin was the best-loved figure in the world. Chaplin cured your depression, your minor illnesses, and people longed for Charlie Chaplin films, and they hadn't had a proper feature since The Kid in 1921. So here was coming a film which would probably outdo any other comedy ever made.
The original release of The Gold Rush was a great success, commercially and critically. I mean, it was one of the top grossing films of the entire Hollywood silent film era. By the 1940s, nothing was more obsolete than a silent film, unwanted. In 1941, he looked at The Gold Rush again and decided that it was time to experiment. There had not been a revival of an old silent picture since the transition years of sound. But a silent film that was a surefire hit all around the world, put it with sound, it'd be wonderful. And it was. It really was. Chaplin saw the 1942 version of The Gold Rush as the definitive version, his last word on the film. The Gold Rush was the first United Artists feature that Chaplin made as the Little Tramp. He had done A Woman of Paris as the first UA film that he contributed to this organization that he started up with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and the director D.W. Griffith as a distribution organization for high-minded producers that wanted to put product into this company. And UA needed this product. They needed a big hit from Chaplin, and he delivered. The Gold Rush went all over the world. UA distributed it in the United States for 5 years. It went all over Europe, Asia. Every market was exploited by UA. Hiram Abrams, president of United Artists, told Chaplin at the Strand premiere, this film will make $6 million. And he was right, it eventually did. Tremendous sum of money. By 1930, The Gold Rush had exhausted its life as a silent film. And then after that, it just sort of went away because all silent pictures by 1930 were rendered obsolete. I mean, they were just unwanted shelf space as far as studios were concerned. So the Gold Rush 1942 version was a way to reintroduce a new audience to the Little Tramp character.
Chaplin was the only member of the original United Artists still active in the 40s, and one suspects there might have been some heavy pressure because everyone knew that his pictures were going to make money. But you couldn't reissue a silent film in the 1940s. And I think Chaplin felt if he was going to do it, it had to be a new film. The audience had to be satisfied he wasn't just taking a film out of a cupboard.
A way to modernize The Gold Rush was to eliminate the intertitles and speak a spoken narration. And that was very modern for the 40s.
In the great gold rush, Alaska was the hope and dream of way-worn men. The ruthless siren of the far north, beckoning thousands to her icy bosom, beckoning thousands to her unknown regions. Big Jim looked deep into the eyes of Black Larson and saw there the soul of a skunk.
The music was a 41-piece orchestra of the finest Hollywood musicians around. It had sound effects. It was a lavish undertaking. He spared no expenses. All the negatives were quite worn. So he went to the outtakes to find a smooth and clean image.
You said, Big Jim. You, the very man I've been looking for.
And put sound, music, words, and tried this bold leap to bridge the silent and sound worlds.
Since that night in the dance hall, the little fellow had not seen Georgia, but an incident was to bring them together again.
The Gold Rush 1942 version is essentially a different film. It was a smaller film. He simplified the film. The most important differences are the Georgia role. Clearly, in the 1942 version, Chaplin decided that that role needed to be reduced. And there was a subplot, as Chaplin called it, with the letter that he felt got in the way of the story.
In the silent version, there was a note which is meant for Jack but passed to Charlie, which makes him think that Georgia is in love with him, because it says, "Please forgive me for last night. I love you, Georgia." But in the sound one, her relationship with her boyfriend Jack, despite his boorishness, is made more obvious, and written out is the possible love for Charlie. And Chaplin rewrites in a letter, "Please forgive me for not coming to dinner." So it's a minor point, but it does have an effect on the overall impact of the film.
The ending of the 1925 version is very clearly an epic success story. Chaplin and Georgia Hale are in a sensual embrace. The hero gets the girl. In the 1942 version, there's no kiss. They simply walk up the stairs hand in hand, and that's open to interpretation. Where do they go from here? Chaplin perfectly gauged the temper of the times and delivered a product that was tremendously successful. And in fact, it was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, one for music and one for sound recording at the 15th Annual Academy Awards in 1943. So it was a hit, not only with the critics and the public, but with the film industry itself. In 1952, Chaplin went to London for the premiere of Limelight. And en route to London, his re-entry permit was rescinded. And at that time, Chaplin decided that he would not come back to America. And so he went into self-imposed exile. And so in 1953, he made the directive to sell the studio. Sell the studio, sell everything. I'm not coming back. And all of the film that was non-essential, including the 1925 Gold Rush, was to be junked. Why keep it? In the 40s and 50s and 60s, no one wanted a silent film, a mute print for commercial exhibition. And everyone had praised the 1942 version as superb, modern, wonderful. So why would he want to bring back the 25 cut when the 1942 cut had been such a tremendous success? But the film material that he thought was junked, including the Gold Rush 1925 materials, had really not been disposed of properly. They were basically bought by the film junking company, by a man named Raymond Rohauer, a film collector and distributor. And he basically cobbled together from all this junk material a 1925 cut of the Gold Rush. So that when Chaplin in 1956 was putting the Gold Rush 1942 cut back onto the market through UA, he was competing with himself through this 1925 pirated copy that Raymond Rohauer had put together. And Raymond Rohauer could do that because, adding insult to injury, Chaplin's legal counsel in California had failed to renew the copyright to the 1925 cut of the Gold Rush. So Chaplin was, to say the least, furious over this situation.
In Europe, it was still in copyright, so Chaplin sued him and won. And I think Rohauer was forced to hand over a great deal of material, which Chaplin then destroyed. I shudder to think what went.
Ah, Georgia, you don't have to explain, I understand. I love you. I'm going to take you away from this life. I'm going away, and when I return, I shall come back.
Since 1942, the rest of the world has seen only the 1942 version, until 1993, when Kevin Brownlow and David Gill attempted the reconstruction of the 1925 Gold Rush.
Pam Pommier, who'd taken over from Rachel Ford as Chaplin's business manager, said, would we be interested in restoring the silent Gold Rush, which was something that David and I longed to do, and the Chaplin family supported this. Overall, It took about 18 months, but for the first half of that, we had no idea how we were going to do it. We could not find any footage. It was as bad as that, except terrible 16mm prints. This wasn't going to work unless the footage was first-class quality. We circulated the archives and private collectors, and yes, they had the gold rush, but all the time it turned out to be the cropped version. Silent films were shot using the entire 35mm frame. As soon as sound came in, the soundtrack took up part of the picture area. This is what happened when the Gold Rush was reissued by anybody, legal or illegal. They slapped a soundtrack on it, and therefore we could not show the film entirely in its original composition. So David Shepard put us on to a version of the 1942 reissue, which was intended for Japan, and for some reason had been printed full aperture. And it was beautiful quality. And that formed the basis for the restoration. We were led to a German archive, and from there we managed to get the scenes we needed, but they were cropped. But they did give us most of the picture for the missing scenes and were absolutely vital. The National Film Archive had a few sequences, and luckily one of them incorporated the entire ending on the boat with the photographer, which Chaplin had removed for the 1942 reissue. We had two cutting continuities. Now, cutting continuity is absolutely vital if you're going to restore a film. There was one which must have been drawn up shortly after the film's release, and that gave you the footage, it gave you the subtitles, or the intertitles as we call them now, and every detail you could want to restore a film is in the cutting continuity. But there was another one made in 1938 when Rolly Totherow, the cameraman, sat down and did a really detailed description of every shot. Normally with a restoration, you don't actually have any guide at all. So it was possible to produce a version which was pictorially identical to what audiences saw in 1925. When titles were put in originally, you lost frames, and consequently all we had to do to find where a title went was to look for those jump cuts.
I said, don't breathe, stupid.
Generally they were there because the title had gone in there and had been cut out.
And be most annoying at times.
There was a master shot of Georgia coming down the stairs, and you can see there's a jump cut there because a couple of extras disappear. When David got into this, he realized that that was where the title went. And by restoring the title, the jump cut disappeared. The aim was to try to reproduce what audiences saw in 1925. First-class quality, full aperture, and we were able to do that for most of the footage. But if there is something that had been removed, and it could only be covered by the German print with the cropping, it was still good enough quality to use, and we just had to put up with the cropping, because after all, that's how the version was going to be shown theatrically. The audience reaction to the result is always wonderful.
Chaplin saw the 1942 version of the Gold Rush as the definitive version. It was his last word, just like Dickens with novels. It's the last pass, the last tweaking. But scholars and fans want to see all the different versions, all the new incarnations. The Chaplin children, the heirs, through their company Roy Export, control the Chaplin library, the films that he owned, those films from 1918 to 1957, including the Gold Rush. And they feel that the 1942 version is the version. And the reconstruction is purely for live orchestra and as a supplement to the 1942 version.
So it's very good of them to allow this version to be restored and for the silent original to spread its wings again.